Every action has a consequence. Every decision shapes the outcome. This is 19-year-old Nikolas Cruz. 3 hours and 55 minutes before this moment, he walked into his former high school in Parkland, Florida, and carried out a mass shooting, killing 17 people, 3 teachers, and 14 students. 17 other students were seriously injured in the attack. 7 minutes after the shooting, the gunman discarded his weapon, exited the building, and disappeared into the crowd. He remained at large for 1 hour and 20 minutes. During that time, he casually spent a few minutes at a Subway restaurant, then sat down at a McDonald's, where he even spoke with the brother of one of his victims. The unsuspecting boy had no idea that the person sitting across from him had just murdered his older sister. As soon as the suspect's description was broadcast over police radio, a patrol unit spotted Nikolas Cruz about 2 miles from the school. He was identified and arrested on the spot. He was immediately taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors confirmed that he had not taken any drugs. Afterward, he was transferred to the local police station for questioning. From the moment Nikolas entered the interrogation room, he kept his eyes fixed on the floor. This behavior suggested one of 2 things. He was either in shock or completely disconnected from time and reality. But the moment the door closed behind him, he suddenly lifted his head and looked around. His behavior immediately changed once he realized no one was watching him. If you compare this to his demeanor just a minute earlier, you can see the stark contrast between apparent unconsciousness and sudden alertness. This indicates that his mind was fully aware of his surroundings. The moment he raised his head, his eyes instantly locked onto the security camera in the room. Now, he knew he was still being watched. That's when he started displaying behavior that suggested he was suicidal. At first glance, his actions seemed genuine, but as the minutes passed, it became clear what was really going on. The evidence was overwhelmingly against the suspect. At this point, there was no doubt. Nikolas Cruz was responsible for the mass shooting. There was no need for a confession. The police already knew he was the killer, but they didn't know why he did it. That's why they devised a specific strategy to uncover his motive. However, what Nikolas said at the time of his arrest made this process even more complicated.
Talk to you. I personally think you're using the demon as an excuse.
I'm not. I promise.
You could have stopped the demon by getting a prescription for marijuana. You could have stopped the demon by getting a prescription for Xanax. You could have stopped the demon by illegally doing marijuana, which you were doing anyway. You could have stopped the demon by doing Xanax illegally, which you were doing anyway. You could have stopped the demon anytime you want. You didn't want to stop the demon.
No, that's not true. That's it.
You didn't. You could have. I've given you 4 ways you could have stopped the demon, man.
His words suggested he was trying to build a narrative around psychosis. This approach made Nikolas believe that his answers might work in his favor. We know that after this interrogation, he had plenty of time to think about the legal implications of mental illness. Every word he said from this point forward could have serious consequences for his case. The more details he revealed now, the fewer options he would have for a future defense. But extracting information was not easy. Interrogations like this typically play out in 2 possible ways. The first scenario is when the suspect completely shuts down, refusing to speak or falling into a catatonic state. In these cases, the interrogation usually leads nowhere. The second scenario is the opposite. The suspect becomes hysterical, starts rambling, and loses control of the conversation. Detective John Curcio had to prevent either of these from happening. That made the first 2 minutes of the interrogation absolutely critical. He needed to establish a friendly yet authoritative presence. He had to appear open to listening while maintaining control. His role at this moment was to be seen as an ally, not an enemy. By observing Nikolas's initial behavior, the detective knew that silence was the more likely response. If he could prevent that silence in the first 2 minutes, he would clear a major hurdle. Detective, are you okay? Nikolas. Yes, detective. Are you sure? Nikolas. Yes. A few minutes later, Nikolas's demeanor changed. He put his hands on his head, visibly distressed. Given the terrible situation he was in, it was easy to guess what was going through his mind. Moments later, he began harming himself, biting his arm and picking at the spot where hospital staff had drawn his blood. As soon as the detective re-entered the room, the self-harm stopped. When asked about his inner demons, Nikolas had been reluctant to speak. But when asked about his mother, he became eager to share. This suggested that his previous silence was not due to any mental illness. He was simply being selective with his responses. Later, when investigators retrieved deleted videos from his phone, a very different story emerged. In those recordings, there were no signs of delusions or confusion. When describing his plan and intent, there was no hesitation. His voice was steady. His face showed no uncertainty. Nikolas Cruz was completely aware of what he was doing. In the end, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the rest of his life, he will live in complete isolation. If you're finding this information valuable, make sure to subscribe to Safekeepia for more life-saving safety tips, real crime cases, and survival strategies. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update, because knowledge can save lives. Now, let's get back to the critical steps you need to know to protect yourself and others. Safety lessons from the Parkland School. Shooting: how to prevent and survive an active shooter incident. But perhaps the most haunting part of this tragedy is that it could have been prevented. The warning signs were there, the threats were made. Yet, nothing was done in time to stop the attack. In this video, we will break down the critical safety measures that could have prevented the shooting and what you can do to protect yourself and others in case of an active shooter situation. Prevention, recognizing warning signs, and taking action. One of the most crucial lessons from the Parkland case is how important it is to recognize red flags before tragedy strikes. In many cases, including this one, mass shooters exhibit clear warning signs before committing violence. Nikolas Cruz had a long history of disturbing behavior. He had been expelled from school, made violent threats, self-harmed, and was obsessed with guns and past mass shootings. These are all serious warning signs that should never be ignored. Key warning signs to watch for expressing threats of violence in person or online: obsession with guns, mass shooters, or violent ideologies, social isolation, bullying, or drastic personality changes, history of animal cruelty, a strong predictor of future violence, making hit lists or expressing intent to harm others, acts of self-harm or suicide threats, extreme anger, paranoia, or signs of untreated mental illness, posting violent, racist, or extremist messages on social media. If you notice any of these signs in someone you know, do not dismiss them. Speak up before it's too late. B. Reporting threats immediately. One of the most devastating failures in the Parkland case was that multiple people reported Nikolas Cruz to authorities, yet no action was taken. The FBI received 2 separate warnings about him before the attack, but they were never followed up on. How to report suspicious behavior. Tell school officials or workplace supervisors. Contact law enforcement. If you believe a threat is immediate, call 911. Reach out to mental health professionals. Some individuals may need urgent psychiatric intervention. Use anonymous tip lines. Many schools and communities have hotlines for reporting threats. Tell a trusted adult. If you're a student and you see warning signs in a classmate, don't hesitate to report it. Remember, reporting a potential threat is not snitching. It's saving lives. If something feels off, trust your instincts and take action. Strengthening school and workplace security. The shooter in Parkland was able to walk straight into the school with an assault rifle. Weak security measures contributed to the loss of life. Schools and workplaces must take proactive steps to prevent these attacks. A. Controlling access to buildings. Limit entry points to schools and workplaces. Require ID badges for all students, staff, and visitors. Use metal detectors or random bag checks where possible. Have security personnel or resource officers on site. B. Enhancing surveillance and communication. Install CCTV cameras at entrances, hallways, and key locations. Implement emergency communication systems such as loudspeakers, text alerts, and panic buttons. Have a threat assessment team dedicated to evaluating potential dangers. How to survive an active shooter situation. If the unthinkable happens, and you find yourself in an active shooter situation, your response could mean the difference between life and death. The run, hide, fight strategy is the best way to increase your chances of survival. A. Run. Escape if possible. If you can safely evacuate, do it immediately. Leave everything behind. Your belongings don't matter. Encourage others to come with you, but don't wait for anyone who refuses. Know your escape routes ahead of time in schools, offices, or public spaces. B. Hide. If you can't run, find cover. Lock doors and barricade them with heavy furniture. Turn off lights, silence your phone, and stay quiet. Stay out of sight. If possible, hide behind thick walls or large objects. Do not open the door for anyone except law enforcement. C. Fight as a last resort. If you're face to face with the shooter and have no other option, fight back with full force. Use any object as a weapon. Fire extinguishers, chairs, scissors. Aim for vulnerable areas like the eyes, throat, or groin. If possible, team up with others to overpower the attacker. What to do immediately after the attack. When law enforcement arrives, keep your hands visible and avoid sudden movements. Follow police instructions. Their priority is neutralizing the threat. Do not point, scream, or hold anything that could be mistaken for a weapon. B. Helping the injured. If safe, provide first aid to the wounded. Use clothing or fabric as tourniquets to stop severe bleeding. Do not move severely injured victims unless absolutely necessary. Long-term recovery and mental health support. Survivors of the Parkland shooting experience severe PTSD, depression, and survivor's guilt. The trauma of an active shooter event can last a lifetime. A. Seeking emotional support, counseling and therapy should be made available to survivors. Support groups can help individuals process their trauma. Parents and teachers should watch for signs of PTSD in children. B. Community healing and advocacy. Survivors can push for policy changes such as gun control, mental health reform, and school safety improvements. Memorials and community support networks can aid in healing. Safety for parents and educators. Parents and teachers play a critical role in keeping schools safe. A. Parents should monitor their child's behavior and social media activity for warning signs. Encourage children to report concerns about classmates. Teach children emergency response actions like run, hide, fight. Ensure mental health resources are available. B. Schools should train staff and students on active shooter protocols. Implement anonymous reporting systems for threats. Have a clear emergency response plan in place. Increase security personnel presence if necessary. Final thoughts. What we must learn from Parkland. The Parkland shooting was a preventable tragedy. Ignoring warning signs cost 17 lives. Lack of security measures allowed the shooter easy access. Failure to act on reports enabled the attack. We cannot afford to make the same mistakes. Recognize warning signs. Report threats immediately. Prepare yourself and others. Advocate for stronger safety measures. Preparation saves lives. Awareness saves lives. Speaking up saves lives. Stay aware, stay prepared, stay safe. Stay informed, stay safe.